Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the transitioning to the AIAG VDA Handbook, What You Need to Know webinar. Real quickly, a little bit of housekeeping to make sure we keep everything set. First off, welcome everybody, and I really enjoyed the chat thing. We got people from Poland, we got people from Turkey, we got people from most of the U.S., Mexico. It's amazing the number of people that have in the areas they came from, and Brazil. Thank you. So next up, Q&A. Guys, as we go along, I already received some emails from people regarding Q&A. If you put your questions into the Q&A as we go along, at the end of the session, I will try to get as many answered as possible, but my commitment is whatever we don't get answered, we will download and we will get you an answer. Now, you have to be patient because there's probably close to 2,000 people on here right now, so you can imagine the volume of questions we get. So be patient, but I will get your answers to you. The other thing is, save your time. You don't have to ask me, is this being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded, and you will be provided an on-demand information as soon as this is done, so you can go back and review it at your leisure down the road someplace. So kind of makes it a little bit easier for you at that point in time. Last thing is, if you have IT issues, I hate to say it, I'm not an IT guy. I had a hard time spelling it when they first brought it up, but my suggestion is if you're having a hard time with viewing or you're having a hard time with hearing, is to simply log out and log back in, and that generally will cure most problems. If that doesn't, keep in mind you will get an on-demand, and I do apologize if we have that type of failure. We don't have it often. So with that, we're going to move on to the introductions. So we have two great guys here today, folks. Jeremy Hazel, lead consultant and trainer for Plexus International, and Brian Martinson, senior product manager with the AIAG. Jeremy's actually written a few books. I actually read one of them, and it's not quite a Stephen King novel, but it was really good. It was very informative. And Brian has been with the AIG for quite a while, and as my go-to person for any information regarding the core tools and that product of that nature. Brian, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure thing, Bill. As Bill said, I'm Senior Program Manager, Quality Products and Services at AIG. Core Tools is one of my areas. Also working with technical data package exchange program, as well as a reliability program currently at AIG. In addition to that, I manage our CTS software, which is available to help manage your core tool products. So I've been with AIG for about 4 years, spent 20 some years in industry prior to that. So I was in the seat a lot of you are in right now. And if I was still in the field, this would be a webinar I'd want to sit into, because with the transition, definitely wanting to know what's going on.
Jeremy, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
All right, folks, my name is Jeremy Hazel. I'm one of the trainers here at Plexus. So some of you might have seen me. Some of you might have actually taken my classes. And some of you, as Bill said, might have read my books. So I've been doing the new version of the AIAG VDA FMEA now for around 2 years since it's been out. And I say approximate time. I'm not going to get down to number of months and number of days. And so one of the things that's interesting here is that I specialize in risk-based thinking. And so the interesting part here is in the transition from the old to the new. There are a lot of paradigms that remain intact, but there are also a lot of paradigms that will be forever changed. So for the last couple of years, I've been consulting on it, teaching on it, implementing it, and authoring on it. So we can do this dance any way you want to do it. And I've probably forgot more about FMEA than most people will ever know. Now, with that, one of the things that I want to do that I kind of want to kick off with is I want to do a quick poll. Now, I hear what you're saying. Everybody goes, oh, there's a poll. But hear me out. This is why I want to do this poll. When you speak to a group as large as what we have on here, if you are speaking to everybody, you may be speaking to nobody. And so what I want to do is I want to get an overall feeling from the large group that we have here, who's in the room with me, so that I can frame this webinar in a way that's valuable to you. Because make no mistake, we're giving you content, we're giving you information, but you are also giving us an hour of your time that can be spent in other ways. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the first poll. There are going to be 2 polls. Let's go ahead and bring this first one up. All right. This first one is going to ask a little bit about your familiarity. Let's go ahead and launch this. So the way that this works, it's going to ask you 4 questions. It's going to ask you about your customer specific requirements when it comes to FMEA. It's going to ask which methodology you are currently familiar with. And the reason why we're asking this, if you folks are well familiar with this AIAG VDA FMEA, that was a lot of letters, version, then I'll approach this one way. If you're brand new to it, I'll approach it a different way. So these questions help me calibrate my front side focus to assure that I make the best use of the hour you guys have chosen to spend with us. Now, I have a rule when I work with small teams, because as you learned in the intro there, my specialization is risk-based thinking and small team development. I stop the fun when we get to 80% participation. So if you want the fun to stop, you've got to participate. That's the way it works. All right, these questions are coming in here. Looks like overwhelmingly your customers are still accepting that old 4th edition. And the methodology, overwhelmingly, you are far more familiar with the old 4th edition, and most of you are process responsible. Fair enough. All right. The surprising thing here is these answers start coming in is that you people are utilizing foundational FMEAs largely in your business. So we've got a couple more here to get in. I'm going to go ahead and stop this again when it reaches 80% and those answers are flying in. And then I'll go ahead and I'll kind of end this poll and we'll go through the results a little bit. And if you tuned into a webinar expecting me to just sit up here and lecture for an hour, not going to happen. We're going to get you involved. We're going to get you interactive. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll here. All right, and let's go ahead and share results. So again, the reason why I share these results is because one of the things you'll hear me say a couple times in this webinar, you are unique, but not different. So the same way that your customers are still much familiar with the 4th edition, it appears that a majority of your peers' customers also are. It looks like most people on this call are heavily reliant on 4th edition. And we get some that are just slightly more process responsible. So to my design folks in the room, congratulations. We're going to talk a little bit more about DFMEA then in this transition. You guys show up, I got to deliver something. And lastly, overwhelmingly, the organization is utilizing foundational FMEAs. Now, Brian's going to be talking about that later. All right, so that allows me to calibrate my front side focus. I got one more here to do. And now I need to know a little bit about the size of your organization, because when we talk implementation, when we talk transitioning, there is a very big difference between how a company that is multinational in a safety critical industry transitions versus, say, a mom and pop like Joe's Plating. So this conversation on size allows me to make sure that I'm talking to the right people in the right way. All right, and again, the fun stops when we reach that 80% mark. Almost there, folks. 65%. Keep it trucking. All right, and we are here. Let's go ahead and end this. Let's go ahead and share out the results. Now, let's see who's in the room. We got a lot of people there, just under the 1,000 person mark in their organizations. You've got a surprising number of organizations that are utilizing FMEA facilitators. Now, that's something we're going to talk about a little bit in this transition. It is highly advantageous based on this new methodology to have people that are skilled in facilitation of the FMEA to aid in your transition, not just in, say, the math or the technical side. Facilitation of an FMEA is equally as important from an emotional intelligence side. No surprise there, most people will be engaging in less than 20 projects. And the reason why this is important here, the varying timelines, again, which Brian will talk about, you'll start seeing these begin to filter in to the projects that you are currently quoting. So those that have less than 20 projects, there's a very real chance that you'll see a few. For more than have 50 projects from multiple customers, you're definitely going to see the need to transition probably earlier than most. And lastly, when it comes to software, we've got kind of a mixed bag. Not a lot of people familiar. They're still all using that Excel spreadsheet there. So good news is I've been to no less than 200 companies in the last couple of years doing this, and you are very much in line with what we've been seeing in industry. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. Let's go ahead and close this up and let's keep this ball rolling. We did the polls. We're good. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and Brian's going to give you a little background on how this harmonization and revision came about. Brian?
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it. So the question has been, why did we revise the FMEA manual? The initial direction of this was that AIAG had our 4th edition handbook, VDA had their FMEA handbook, and the thing that did not align were the severity occurrence detection tables. The initial approach on this was to harmonize those tables so that, at least for the supply-based perspective, if an occurrence was 5, it meant the same no matter whether you're using AIAG or VDA. Many of you, as you probably in some cases painfully are aware of, we're either supplying AIAG formatted FMEAs or VDA formatted FMEAs. And to ease up that pain point, we wanted to harmonize those tables. Well, once the AIAG volunteer members got into the room with the VDA volunteer members, we started discussing and realized we're not as far off from each other as what we thought. You know, there are some formatting things and there are some methodology things, but the conversation started going that we can really gain a lot from each organization and develop, you know, a lot of or a consistent methodology, which is what we did come up with. So we did agree to pursue that. A couple other factors that weighed in that was the adaptation of the new technology of components and systems. AIAG's last FMEA handbook, I believe, was 2006. And in that time, there have been some significant changes in vehicles from that point to where it is now. And, you know, thinking back 2006, you're probably just on your radio, we're getting CD players on your cars. And now it's a special order and you're either putting SD cards in or thumb drives or different things like that. So there's been a pretty significant change in the technology. And then the other is the introduction of the mechatronics and things like that. The FMEA MSR was really a big changer because those systems now that provide feedback that are safety related, things like that, we didn't have a good mechanism for really deep diving those and handling and looking at monitoring and frequency and things like that. So there were a whole host of technical reasons once we got in that we can do, you know, as far as developing the new methodology. We did take best practices from both organizations. And sitting into several years worth of meetings, there were times I can tell you the AIAG membership probably was a little frustrated thinking, boy, this is pretty VDA heavy. There were times the VDA membership was saying, boy, AIAG just is not giving up their ways. Their members are really drawing a line in the sand. Being involved with program management on it, in a supporting role to Scott Gray, who was the AIAG program manager. I was able to witness a lot of the frustrations that members of both organizations shared with him, that it's one side or the other. So based on that alone, I think it was a pretty good mix. Everybody feels like they've had to move one way or to the other a little bit. Obviously, if you're used to 4th edition, you feel like this is clearly the VDA methodology, but they're saying a lot of the same stuff. There's a lot of stuff we had to change to conform with AIAG and what we wanted to do there. So the end goal was to make sure that we develop a methodology that's going to be applicable for everybody, no matter what they're making. We did have OEMs in the room. We had semiconductor manufacturers. We had bulk material. We had all sorts of different component manufacturers in the room, different types of organizations. We had a whole host of organizations we vetted this with to make sure that this will be applicable no matter what you're doing. At the end, we've delivered a document that is significantly thicker than what AIAG's 4th edition was, but there's some improvements to it as far as the consistent methodology now that covers more than 80% of the automotive industry, as well as a hint section in the back. I mean, that was something that never existed. If you wanted guidance, you had to read through the document, which you still have to do now, but you would read through it and look at maybe a canned example and think, okay, well, how did they apply that? How did they come to that? Well, now what the team did was develop, here's the sheet. This is the type of content you're putting in there. So you have that hints page or pages that you can go through depending on the format you're using. So you have a good understanding of what gets put into there. So again, a lot of technical improvements to the document, consistent methodology, and the base goal was achieved with the harmonized severity, occurrence, and detection tables. Next, go ahead, Jeremy. Next slide.
All right, folks. So if we're talking about this and we're saying, okay, we're going to spend about half an hour more going through the big deals for transitioning, right? So what we did here is we talked as content of this webinar, and we said, if you had a limited amount of time to communicate from the writing team's perspective, from the trainer's perspective, from the utilization perspective, what are the 3 big deals that you would want them to take away from the webinar? And while Brian said this book is a little bit thicker, there are really 3 major improvements that everybody could largely come to consensus on in terms of what was important to share with you as a group that would transition. The first one is that it took something that was largely an unstructured approach and it provided structure to it. Now, I'd be willing to bet you if you've ever sat in on an FMEA meeting, it went something like this. You call a meeting at 10 a.m. for 3 hours. You trick people into the room to sit with you. And then one person opens up an Excel document while the other 9 in the room look for sharp objects to end their suffering. That's traditionally how it was done. And it was a race from the left-hand side of the sheet to the right-hand side of the sheet, pane by painful line. So the first thing we're going to talk about for just a couple minutes is the structured approach. Then Brian's going to talk to you about leveraging lessons learned, because foundation and family FMEAs are a thing, and you don't want to make the same mistake every day. You want to make a new mistake every day. And the third thing, as Brian said, the harmonization of the tables led to a new agreed upon method to quantify risk, sort of. And this is what's called AP. We'll talk about that when we get there. And it really focuses on being error proofing driven. Before, and I will say that largely the way that the RPN was calculated, detection carried as much weight as severity. And so the old method, it could be said, was more detection driven, because detection was just as important as severity. Now they're looking at weighting these things so that error proofing is given a higher weight in terms of what you work on and what you don't. So these are the 3 things that we wanted to communicate, and that's what we're going through here for the next couple minutes. Now, for my design folks in the room, design and process will follow the same 7 steps. Okay, this is a big deal. What the group did with this new AIAG VDA process is they broke the act of creating an FMEA down into 7 defined steps. So let's go through them together. The first step is plan and prepare. So for those that are Six Sigma speakers, this is very similar to the define phase in DMAIC. If you were doing a Six Sigma project, you would never take on a project until you had a clear project charter with boundaries, objectives, and goals. So this is about gathering the tools, gathering the troops, setting the objective. From there, you go into structural analysis. Now, for my design folks, this could be your block or boundary diagram. For my process folks, this would be your process flow diagram, your PFD. Now, the thing that I want to communicate here is that this new method is not revolution of risk-based thinking. It is the natural evolution. So the graphical tools that we have used, the block diagram for design, the process flow in the PFMEA, are still very much in play. Now, what you do now is once you have the structure figured out, you then go to function. Functional analysis is the third step. Now, Why am I highlighting functional analysis and putting more emphasis on it? And this is because historically, the FMEAs that have been performed in industry, when you got pulled into that room for 3 hours, it became almost a nonstop parade of throwing out failures, right? They'd get together and you'd brainstorm all the ways stuff fails. And in doing that, in putting the failure first, we failed to realize, no pun intended, that failure is just simply the negation of function. We missed the functional part. 0 time was spent on the functional analysis and all the time was spent on the failure. And this led to ineffective FMEAs because unless you realized that the functions had a role to play, your failure analysis would never capitalize on that. So failure is the negation of function, and function is the precursor to the failure analysis step, step 4. Now, once you go through failure analysis, we then go into step 5, which is risk analysis. In step 4, once you have the failure chain, the failure effect, the failure mode, and the failure cause, you then take control and you say, how do I prevent it? How do I detect it? And if I have this prevention and this detection in place, what is the risk profile that is created? And I use that term very succinctly, risk profile. In the old version, for those that are familiar with 4th edition, notice how I came back to your poll results because a lot of you understand our 4th edition. The existence of a risk priority number, or an RPN, is a risk profile. So in creating any RPN, what you are actually creating is a risk profile that your product or process conveys to the next level of integration. So in this step 5, we're still doing the same thing, but this is where, as Brian will cover here later, the foundational family FMEAs can gain us some insight on history, which makes our occurrence more robust. And I'll cover the AP, in which we're going to look at how we look at this risk profile differently. Once you have the risk analysis, you decide what to optimize. And optimization, folks, is a fancy $7 word way of saying recommended actions. And it's important that we use that term optimization because depending on your industry, your commodity, and your company, you'll decide from the risk analysis what you're going to optimize to get it as good as it can be given your company, your industry, and your commodity. And lastly, just like bookending, once you're in that 7th step, we then record the results. So folks, this is where we take a look at the objectives that we put down during the plan and prepare. We then look at where we ended up once we got to the end of our journey, and we reconnect in terms of whether or not we're where we want to be. Now, the last thing that I'll say here before I turn it over to Brian, this represents a shift in the methodology of FMEA. It used to be, as I said, that you would start at the left-hand side of the line and you would race to the right-hand side of the form. The old method, the 4th edition form, was done horizontally. I'll just put a little H here. Now, the way that I want you to think about this now that it's stepped, the same way you do APQP, you do step 1 and you phase gate. You do step 2 and you phase gate. You do step 3 and you phase gate. It's now step focused. So this helps your team very succinctly make sure that before you step from structure to function, that your structural analysis is sound. After 2 years of doing this, I will tell you, this subtle approach to the way that FMEA is done leads to a higher quality of event with less rework and better results, 100%. Brian, would you like to take them through the second big deal? Oh, you're muted, but
Yeah, I know. I double muted myself there. Sorry. So I absolutely would love to go through this. So we look at some of the major improvements, and one of them is leveraging lessons learned. Again, that's a fancy way of saying putting the information back into the FMEA. There's several ways to do that. One is through the optimization, where we're continually going through, we're studying these, what formerly were recommended actions. By the way, side note with that, a lot of organizations would put up RPN threshold numbers for recommended actions. And if you hit a three-way calculation that came up to a certain number, you had to do a recommended action. And as long as you kept it under that number, you were in the clear and you didn't have to. The new methodology, step 6 optimization, is a standard part of the 7-step process that you're going to go through and optimize every step. It doesn't mean you have to do something to every step, but you're at least going through and analyzing what can't be done. Is it feasible? Is it not feasible? Is it economical? Requirement depending, whatever it is. So part of that lessons learned now is as you're putting this stuff into the FMEA and you're doing the analysis, you're continuing to feed that content back into the FMEA. Now, one of the easy ways we do it is by baselining. And when we baseline with the new methodology, we're setting up either a foundational or a family FMEA. Foundational is a very basic, this is what we do. Family, you're getting higher up, and we'll see the graphic next on the next slide. But you're setting up these base level documents that you're pulling all your content from, so that when you start out and you are doing a very specific part that's unique for a customer, you're going back to that family FMEA that has all the content that you need to launch off of, so that you are now putting just your part specifics in and managing that for the FMEA process. What's nice about this is as you're learning lessons on these part specific FMEAs and updating these, you can now go back into your family FMEAs and your foundational FMEAs, and you're recording that information in there. So the next project that comes along, whether you're involved on it or another team member is involved on it, or even another location is involved on it, that information is already there for the team. So we talk about collaboration, we talk about cross-function, we talk about the 3-hour meetings, everybody in the room. Well, this goes a long way to get that feedback, to make sure not only is everybody represented, but you're getting knowledge just from inside your facility, but from outside your facility as well. These family and these foundational FMEAs, especially since many of the organizations here specialize in certain types of commodities, you can develop that one and it would be applicable to all your locations. I come from a plant, we did a lot of rotary MIG welding. If I learned something, I handed it off to my teammates, and that's how we would share that information. And we wound up managing this in one family FMEA, because rotary MIG welding was rotary MIG welding no matter where you did it in our facility. We bought all our equipment from the same place. So now we could easily share that. And that's really one of the big things here, is that writing in that family foundational FMEA into the methodology, it's not necessarily a requirement, but that foundation is there. So you are setting up your FMEAs based on that baseline data that's common to everybody. Not only is it knowledge sharing, it's going to accelerate your process as well, because all of those 7 steps will have been gone through. Now you're putting in specifics based on product design needs, product manufacturing needs, and the specific things you need to do to hit those specific customer requirements. So with that, Jeremy, do you have anything you want to add on that one real quickly before we move on to the error proofing?
I will tell you, as somebody that's been implementing these for the better part of 2 years, and I was doing this, Brian and I had this talk, I was doing this back when I called it modular FMEA, but it was one of those things that previously might have been frowned upon, but now the manual, as strongly as I can say, requires it, condones it, and recommends it as the baseline to that planning and prep. So it is a huge efficiency boost. And it also helps with the trickiest one that everybody kind of agrees is hard, to get that magical type of occurrence value. If you have good historical baselines, your occurrence value will be taken care of for you.
Yeah, and to that point, it was about 19 or 20 years ago, we did our first family foundational FMEA. And we had a customer that was a competitor. They weren't happy with it. We had a common customer that they went to. They weren't happy with it. And it took some time to sit down with the appropriate people in the organizations before they finally got on board and say, okay, we understand, it makes sense for what you're doing. The fear was that we had 3 distinct commodities and we had all our commodities on one document. When they finally sat down and looked at it, they said, okay, no, this does make more sense to do it that way. Now, there still was a very high level of scrutiny. Every time we put a PPAP in, if they knew of a quality issue or anything else, it didn't matter what line it was on. They were going in and looking to make sure it was in the document. So it does require some discipline on that and to make sure that it's constantly updated. But in the long run, when you're sharing this knowledge and you're improving your processes across multiple lines and share similar technology, again, it starts that acceleration of, well, Jeremy did it on this line. That makes a lot of sense. It really worked. I'm going to put it on my lines as well, so I can experience that benefit and also maintain that consistency within our processes. So opens up a ton of knowledge sharing with that.
Yeah. Plus, on the small team side, human creatures look for revision rather than creation. So with your small team, it does help because you can now pull out the baseline and say, what is different from this baseline? What are the differences that we have to explore? Not bring out the blank sheet of paper and what do we have to create today? If you can focus them around differences and deltas, your quality of event and the time improves substantially.
Helps that risk management out too.
Yep. All right. Speaking of risk management, let's go ahead and take a look at the third major thing that we want to talk about. Now, this whole thing I got in front of you, we're going to take a minute with this one. So when the team set out to do this, they were thinking about how could we make it more robust? How could we put first things first? And how could we make the things that an organization was working on actually matter? And so if you look at the traditional RPN, and I have some 4th edition speakers in here coming back to those polls, severity, occurrence, and detection are all weighted the same. Now, if we think of this like a stock portfolio, if you have 3% of your portfolio in one stock and it triples overnight, did your portfolio triple? No, because it's weighted, right? You had a minority of the stock in that portfolio. So the same thing now is true here. We've taken in this new AIAG VDA and we've given severity the most weight. Severity runs the show. Now, in this example, I'm using 9 and 10. There are similar tables for all the way down to severity of 1. Your 10 to 1 doesn't change. And notice here that every conceivable permutation of occurrence is nested inside of every conceivable permutation of severity, thus making severity the primary driver in the weight. Now, over here, you still have the 10 to 1 detection values. And again, I said this was evolution, not revolution. We're still using a 10 to 1. But notice detection now is nested inside of every conceivable value of occurrence. And the resulting weight distribution that comes out, severity calls the shots. Occurrence counts for less than severity, but more than detection. And detection really counts for the least. And if you pay attention to the conversation the industry is having with this, they're saying, oh, you can detect it. Yeah, that's cool, but it really doesn't matter to me. I'd rather you prevent it. I'd rather it be error proofed, right? Occurrence is going to have more weight. And they really want you working on first things first. Now, in order to do this, RPN is largely going away. I'm not going to have the conversation of RPN and all that kind of stuff. But what we're going to talk about is a new thing called AP. AP stands for action priority. And action priority now comes in 3 flavors: high, medium, and low. Now, if you think about it from an implementation side, and I'm going to give you something that you won't find in any book. When you look at human beings, there's a phenomenon, right, called analysis paralysis. The more options you give a human being, the less likely they are to make a decision, which is why when they introduce new cell phones, you only have 2 or 3 colors. If they gave you 14, you would be more apt not to choose any at all. In the old version of RPN, there were 1,000 possible permutations that they could choose from. Now there's high, medium, and low. Gonna be a thing, might be a thing, might not be a thing. So this improves the decision-making ability of your team by putting 1, severity first, making it error-proofing driven through weighting occurrence higher than detection. And if there are subtle discrepancies, it doesn't matter whether it's a 600 or a 650. It's either a high, a medium, or a low. It puts first things first to make sure that you're working expeditiously on things that actually drive your performance. And the last thing that I'll cover here, for those that are MSA speakers, business metrics have the same prone error states. How many times, if everything was weighted the same, if your group got it wrong, and let's say they thought occurrence was a 6, but it was actually an 8, your RPN could be largely thrown off. But here, if your group gets the occurrence wrong, doesn't really matter. You wind up at the same high. You wind up at first things first. You end up working on things that actually matter. So the MSA gauge R&R error in your business process metric decision making is far better in this method. So this AP is going to take your severity, your occurrence, and your detection. It's going to focus on error prevention rather than detection, and it's going to drive severities the highest. From there, you'll have high, medium, and low. And this will help you put first things first, make decisions more expeditiously in your organization, and it leads to measurement systems with higher reliability in your support process of FMEA. So some stuff you never even thought of with the AP.
One thing I want to throw in there real quickly, Jeremy, if you could go back to that slide. Yeah, it just popped in my head. I want to make sure everyone's aware of this. Not only is severity weighted first and given priority, but among that severity, that 10 rating is for safety. And we were very, I mean, I know 4th edition, 9 and 10, there was some wiggle room on safety items. We've done a lot to clarify the language when it comes to safety on the PFMEA side, also looking at operator safety. So that was a very primary focus of the group to make sure that we were weighting safety in there as well. So with that severity rating, again, safety was paramount, and it came up several times through this.
Yep. Safety regulatory, 9s and 10s has always been, probably always will be. If I was a betting man, I'd say those probably will not change in later revs. All right. So we talked a little bit about the 3 mechanics. We talked about the 7-step approach. We talked about leveraging lessons learned. And we talked about making the new way that you kind of look at risk profiles, error proofing driven, gets more weight. One thing that I wanted to cover on a transition piece is that in this transition, Brian's going to go through the timelines with you, but don't lose sight of the other benefits that the ability to go through your FMEAs at this point conveys. Because true, there is a technical transition. We're moving from one to another, but this is also a chance to take a look at the FMEAs that you currently have, the processes that you currently have, and link them up with some things such as cost of quality. I just wanted to touch on, and we put this in here for this reason, the FMEA is one of the primary drivers for cost of quality. And an FMEA can be used in part with cost of quality to determine what you're working on and what you're not working on. As an example, every single piece of scrap in your scrap bin at the end of the day is there because it failed to fulfill a requirement. Therefore, every piece of scrap should have its own line item on the FMEA. So if you wanted to transition and you really just wanted to adopt the idea of, well, it was in this square and now it goes to this square, you can do that. You can do some data jockeying, fill in the gaps, but you're going to miss out on a very, very important time in your organizational development, which is, do the FMEAs that we have make financial sense based on the performance that we have experienced? Are our occurrence values too low and we're shorting ourselves? Are they too high and we're not giving ourselves enough credit? And so you can use tools like COQ, and we're not going to go through it in depth here, but COQ in general comes in 4 distinct flavors. COQ looks at external failure costs. So if it gets outside, it goes to the customer and then they hit you with that 8D request. What are the costs associated with that in terms of even your team's time? Internal failure cost, scrap costs, rework costs, sort costs, and even things you don't think about. Overtime caused by high scrap, when you bring somebody in on a Saturday, that is a cost of quality. Is your occurrence representative of that? These are the questions that you can ask once you get a chance to unpack this as part of your transition process. The last 2 here, there are 4. external, internal, then appraisal and prevention. Now, Brian's going to talk a little bit about appraisal versus prevention here in what we're calling the core tool software, the CTS. But think about it this way, folks. Every test that you put in the FMEA is an appraisal cost for detection, right? You're detecting it. And those preventative maintenance, those calibration activities, those are prevention costs. So when you look at the FMEA, the performance of the FMEA now has the opportunity to be unpacked and optimized as a result of this transition activity. And Brian, you wanted to talk to him about benefit, let's say, in separating those two when it comes to CTS, the new 7-step approach.
Absolutely. One of the first benefits, and it's just, you've mentioned forms a few times and methodology. If you look at the forms and the differences and how they're structurally set up, one is in 4th edition, you're identifying the cause, then you're rating your occurrence, and then you're looking at prevention detection. When you go to the AIAG and VDA FMEA format, you're looking at prevention, then you're rating occurrence, then you're looking exclusively detection, and then you're rating detection. So we did split those up for that methodology. Our CTS software does the same thing. As you're putting this content in, if you're switching between forms, it is aligning it to the methodology, and it's driving you to that thought process of, okay, what do I have in place to prevent this, and what's the likelihood of this happening? If you look at the old tables, they got very heavy into 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion. This is more of is it very likely? There's going to be the break of the muscle memory. And I understand there will be frustration as you transition because you are thinking differently. But now, if you're looking at the equity of all of this, if you make 12 products a year because you're highly specialized and it's something that goes on something unique, that occurrence rating is no different than if you made 12 million parts a year. If you're in fasteners, you can vary your PPM pretty quickly. You just turn up the press, so you turn up the screw machine and let it run, and you bulk your problem away, so your occurrence looks really low. But if you're not, one mistake will cost you forever. Now you're looking at likelihood. And like I said, with our CTS software, as you're doing that, it does realign these into the proper format so that we can now, change that methodology, change that thinking, and realize, okay, this is what's really linked now with occurrences. Are we preventing the defect? And those prevention costs, Jeremy has some good ones there, but remember too, a lot of your prevention costs and your manufacturing operations, those sensors, those air proofing devices you put in, the pokey yokes you're putting in, all those different process improvements you've made over the years, those are prevention. If you can't make the defect, that's a prevention item. If you're putting something on your gauge to make sure you didn't make it, that's going to affect your detection. And again, that's why we put more weight in prevention, because you're still making scrap if you're not stopping it, but you're catching it at the gauge. There was a question I saw that popped up about the occurrence is 4 or 5, but the detection is 1. That has to be wrong. No, you can still make the mistake. It just means you have a really good means of catching that. And that's the thought process that has to be made on that. Is you can invest in having an incredible gauge that's going to catch every mistake, or you can invest in having an incredible process that's not going to make anything. And more, we need to be thinking process. Let's not make the error so that we don't have to worry about catching it.
All right. So the last thing that I kind of want to leave you with, because as transition, and this is important for everybody in the call to understand, the industry is getting the same message. Notice that's so important that I highlighted in bold here. So your registrars, your CBs, your OEMs are giving the same message. And the quicker you receive it, the easier this will go. The main purpose of the FMEA is to mitigate technical risks to an acceptable level. We can then affirm the organizational efforts to develop FMEA will only be valid if incidents of internal and external failures remain within acceptable limits after the product is launched. Folks, in this new transition, as I said before, you can technically decide, I want to transfer from this cell in Excel to that cell in Excel. You can whip the forms, you can call it a day, and you can probably meet with a lot of pain the objective, but you will not hit the intent. Being able to now open up our processes, challenge the occurrences, check out the detections. And the way that I do this when I train, never, ever, ever let the ritual become more important than the result. If your FMEA is 30 pages and it is performing to the PPM and the scrap rates you quoted, it is better than a 400-page FMEA. The goal is not to create excessive paperwork. The goal is to create an FMEA that manages your risks to meet the commitment that you signed up for in APQP. The challenge for you folks as transitionary people is going to be balancing the effectiveness and the efficiency. So there's always a trade-off. I'm not here to tell you that there's not. Effectiveness, just like the message you get in IETF, effectiveness before efficiency. However, there are ways to be more efficient. And one of the things that I like here, and then I'll turn it back over to Brian for the last couple minutes, this new book at the beginning of each step for both design and process lays out, here are the objectives. Here are the milestones you hit in each step. And then the tools and how you do it will be up to your organization. So if there are tools your corporate culture uses that you are highly achieving with, use the tool that you are masterful with in order to meet the intent and the objective. That's the trick. This handbook does not tie your hands and tell you you must go through column 1 and then you must use column 2 and then you must use fault tree analysis. No, it says, here's the objective. Here are some tools that we'd like to share with you. And other than that, create the tool that gets you to the objective that drives the performance. That's the way you want to approach this. This is a great guidebook. Okay. It's a tool. All right, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. And to that point that Jeremy just had, there was discussion during the meeting process of this. Do you do structure first? Do you function first? And I tell you what, you could have gone to, if you wanted to see 2 hours of debate, you just threw that on top because people would argue both ways. We had to put them in an order, but there is no, if you do one over the other and it works for your company, again, to Jeremy's point, do it. What's efficient, what's effective for you. So the timeline, and this is a question we get at AIAG all the time, is when is this going to be mandatory? Well, we announced this at the 2019 Quality Summit. FCA, now Stellantis, Ford, and Honda North America all were on the team and announced at the Quality Summit they will begin accepting it as of 2019. And as programs start coming in, newer programs are going to start phasing that in. And again, they're putting their emphasis on things like the high profile programs, the safety items, the things like that, that they're viewing as mission critical for their getting their stuff launched. General Motors has said that they would begin accepting this within calendar year 2023. Now, there are a lot of rumors out there about different organizations and different announcements and different this and different that, and have there been any changes? The one thing I can tell you definitively, that when AIAG knows of a change, we will let you know. But also follow up your customers, customer-specific requirements. The way that we were initially told they're going to do this, they are going to look at commodities, they are going to look at risk. And I think potentially even suppliers play a role in it. Where do they see that they need to put the most resources to go ahead and move this forward? And that's what they're doing. They've all thrown out a date around 2027, that time frame. So it was about an 8-year transition to get everybody switched over. What they didn't want to do is have you go through and redo all your legacy processes. They wanted to start with the new processes, and then either those would transition into something new with engineering changes, or at the end, it'd be a cleanup activity to get the rest of those up to speed. So again, AIAG will continue to communicate with you, but watch those customer specific requirement updates. And those usually are on the IATF website, or they would be communicated directly to you by your supplier quality team at your customer's organization. Now, if you're a sub tier, again, you want to keep your eye on what your end item customers are doing, those OEMs, but you're still going to take some direction from that tier 1 or that tier 2, depending where you fall in. The goal is this is going to be an automotive FMEA methodology. And so the expectation is, as organizations say, we are flipping the switch and going exclusively to that we will do that. So next slide, if you would, Jeremy. So we have this transition from 4th edition. If you're currently using 4th edition, what should you do? Well, we don't want to just go ahead and flip the switch on this and say, all right, we're doing this, we're not even going to worry about it, we're just going to throw resources at it. Take some time. This is like when you're QMS, when we implemented IATF 16949, you do the same type of thing. Get a hold of the document, read it, get an understanding of where you're at, look at what's common, what isn't, do a gap analysis. What do we have that's currently done? What gaps do we need to fill? Again, if you're using a software package, and our CTS software does this, flip that switch to go from one template to the other and just visibly see where your gaps are and how you need to break this down. You may have a lot of the content there. Just when you're using the methodology, you're now breaking up some of these items to where you're looking at your level, your customer's level, and the end item user level. These are all things we've been thinking about for years, but now it's methodically broken down. So you're looking specifically at, what's the effect of that? What's the failure mode of that? What are the different problems we're going to come into looking at the different layers? When you have an understanding, where are my gaps? I've read through the standard. Get some training. You can come to AIAG. We offer training. Jeremy is one of our FMEA trainers, but get that training in there. Get the multidisciplinary team together, people that have an understanding, people that are new to it. Within your organization, if you have facilitators, you can identify. Get those folks involved, get them together, and get some people trained. Talk about it. See what the changes are and what you have to do to get it moving. As you start getting into that, now look at where your gap is and how have you closed that gap. Pick an area to work on and identify one process, one product, whether you're doing design or process FMEA, and transition that over. Record your lessons learned, figure out what you need to do for the remaining of that transition, but focus on one area to go ahead and begin to change. If you try and change them all at one time, you're probably going to frustrate yourself and your team, and you're not going to develop successful documents. I can tell you too often the FMEAs, and I would get these when I was in supplier quality, they weren't thought through. Somebody pencil whipped it to go ahead and get it out and say, I gave you an FMEA, now sign my PPAP. The FMEA, while the customer has a benefit from it, it's not done for the customer. It's done for the organization. If you're not learning from it, improving your designs, your processes, things like that, then you're really wasting an opportunity you have. And this transition is a great opportunity to reevaluate what you're doing and develop that structure and improve your thought process on how you're detecting and preventing and identifying failures. And then again, begin to standardize it once you get that through. One of the new features of the document is the actual call out of an FMEA facilitator, an FMEA moderator. That person may be highly skilled in the FMEA process, but they may not be highly skilled in the manufacturing process or the process design. But utilize somebody like that to make sure that your technical experts can focus on the technical expertise, and that moderator, facilitator can focus on methodology and make sure that we are addressing that we are following the 7-step process, that we are looking at and evaluating the tables as they are identified. Really, what is severity? What is our real risk of occurrence on this? And then how are we truly detecting this? There's always that concept, who's the easiest person to lie to? And I'm kind of convinced the easiest person to lie to is yourself. And it's really easy to talk yourself into numbers. And because we're not doing RPN and people looked at that mathematical calculation, relax, be truthful. It's a good chance to look at what you're really doing, evaluate it correctly, knowing that you still are going to go through and look at optimization opportunities for everything you have in that document, but build something that is going to work for you. And then finally is that continual improvement approach to make it a living document. The family foundational FMEAs, if you're keeping those updated, will go a long way to feed into your product specific FMEAs, whether they be design or process, and make sure that as you are launching new products and new processes or updated products and processes, all those lessons learned are being rolled into your new release, and you're improving what you do and getting that effect for your customer. So again, the resources that are available to you, we have a couple of these webinars, Jeremy and I, this is the second one we've done. I'm sure there'll probably be more coming in the future as we continue this transition, because again, it's not a slow transition, it's taking some time, but that's just the organizations being deliberate with it. But if you don't have the FMEA, the AIAG and VDA FMEA Handbook, go out and get it. If you're supplying to Ford, GM, Stellantis, BMW, whomever, it's going to be the same methodology. We have an e-learning bundle where you can get the e-doc and the e-learning for one price, and there's a couple-hour e-learning you can go through that talks through a little more detail than this on a transition and things you need to work into. But we also have training available. As opposed to the past where we had design, we had FMEA training, and whether you did design, process, you've done it for 20 years, you've put the acronym together 20 minutes before you showed up in class, you went to the same class. We've broken this up by design and process. So while they put, well, I specifically asked for saving space, put design and process on the same line. We have a design FMEA transitioning course and a process FMEA transitioning course. They are biased towards those activities because there are, while the methodology is the same, there are some practical differences in the mindset and what you're looking at and the type of information you're populating the FMEA with. We do have and those again are for people that have done FMEA. If you've been around it for a few years, you're recognized as the expert in your organization, take the transitioning class. There's gonna be some parallels drawn between you did this in 4th edition. This is how you're gonna do it in AIG and VDA, and some hints along the way about how to help flip those switches and change that thinking. If you're the understanding and implementing classes for both design and process FMEA, if you're new to FMEA, definitely the class for you. The good news I'm going to tell you is if you get into a transitioning instead of an understanding and implementing, or an understanding and implementing instead of transitioning, you're going to walk out with the same information. It's just some of the approach on getting to that is a little different based on the foundation where you're at. So don't fret. You're still going to wind up getting a good education out of it. And then finally, we do have that Essentials for Transitioning e-learning. That's a couple-hour online course. You're going to go through and see a little deeper than what we went into today, but it's not going to be the same level as going to a 2-day course on learning how to properly build an FMEA that's satisfying the methodology we have. And I believe with, real quickly, there's an e-document. Unfortunately, the way we have to structure our e-documents, as an association, your company technically owns that because your account is through them, but you would have to do that. Now, there are some things coming up with e-documents. There are some opportunities, like some organizations have site licenses to these that would give everybody that opportunity to view those e-documents. You really have to check in with, if you're as an AIG member, who your AIG member rep is in your organization to see how some of that is structured, or reach out to AIG customer service. We can definitely help you out with that. And I believe with that, I think we have one more survey there, and I think it's time for some questions.
So, okay, everybody, I'm going to start with, I am the general chat box that everybody's been using. I'm going to put my email into that, and if you have any questions whatsoever that I have not got, feel free to email me at this email address. A lot of you guys put your questions into the chat, and I don't have the capabilities of downloading that when this is done. I mean, you take that with all the highs and everything that's in there, it's not feasible. So also, anonymous attendee, you asked numerous questions. Anonymous attendee, you probably should send your questions to me directly, because I have no way of responding to an anonymous attendee, because it shows up just as that. So moving right along. Question: is risk limiting priority, is it the same as action priority?
I'm going to, Brian, are you familiar with risk limiting priority? Is that, I'm assuming that is threshold. Is that what you assume?
That's kind of my thought there too.
No, threshold, and threshold is dead, gone. We should have buried it in the backyard. It keeps coming back like Pet Cemetery. Stop using thresholds. We're now going to the AP. AP is a completely different beast.
Okay, and our SPC and MSA manuals are going to be updated to have linked to the new AIAG FEMA VDA.
Right now, there are no plans to update those. I always tell people never say never, but those are not the next priority updates. We have a couple other that we are looking at, but those are going to be a whole status quo there for a little bit.
And one thing I'll mention is the current MSA and SPC manual still linked to the new FMEA, because if it's in the detection column, you need an MSA on that gauge. If you're working on a control plan for PFMEA, you need a statistical process control. So they're still applicable to this, the new one.
Yeah.
Okay, how can the DFEMA be used to identify the design special characteristics?
All right, I'll talk to that one as the design guy here. This is one of the huge upgrades of this new method. And I'll tell you, because I do a lot of DFMEA facilitation. The DFMEA deals in functions, and it is through the functions that the characteristics come on the print, such as a flange's need to attach. That's the function, attach to this thing. Therefore, on the print, you put down hole diameters, hole positions, no burr conditions, and circularity. So the DFMEA works toward assessing critical characteristics or special characteristics through the assignment of critical functions. So the functional analysis in step 3 is paramount. And before, it was largely overlooked. Now it is the center star of the show. Brian?
Anything I add on is going to be superfluous. You did a good job on that one.
Can you walk through a quick AP calculation at the end of the presentation? How about 6S25D or 6S205D? Or should
So
we
if we
say
did a 625, if you look at the AP table, you're going to look at your severity as 6, and then that's going to funnel down into your occurrence, and then that's funneled to your detection. What that is off the top of my head, I don't know, because there are 1,000 combinations, but it looks like Jeremy may be pulling something up here for us.
I can do one, Brian. It's fine. Could you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Zoom decided I was done for a moment. So yeah, 6 is going to be down here somewhere. So all you do is you take the 6, let's say instead of 9 or 10, it's a 6. Then you go to the 5 in occurrence, then you go to the 2, and then you just come right over here to the table. So you'll have to look at the other tables there to kind of go through. My example only has the 9 and 10.
so? I like this one. So risk will be considered for new automated electronic cars.
100%.
Yes. Yes. That, again, the whole functional safety MSR, which is section 4 of the handbook. I mean, there was one big piece of the inspiration, which is all the new technology in vehicles. The neat thing about MSR is that historically you cannot change severity on your FMEA unless you go through basically a design change of the product. And even then, some severity items are always going to be severity items. But with MSR, now you can affect that severity rating depending on that monitoring and that system response. An example I like to use, and Jeremy may have a better one, but if you're driving along and let's say a sensor says, okay, your vehicle is not safe to operate over 45 miles an hour. Now all of a sudden you have a throttle limiter on that. Well, guess what? That's going to affect the severity of some other items like that. So that is a consideration and a feedback that's put into it that did not exist before. Both, you know, and that's a positive example of it. But the other is you're actually evaluating those systems, and there's a better approach to handle those types of technologies that are in a vehicle, especially when you look at monitoring and that system response.
Yeah. With that, the monitoring systems are becoming more and more frequent, and it's taking more and more control from the driver, right? The decision will be made by the monitoring system. So in this new method, there is not only DFMEA, PFMEA, but if you are design responsible for the monitoring system, there's that MSR FMEA that Brian's referred to. That's a completely new, different beast. Yep.
Okay, got multiple on this one. Is there an Excel spreadsheet someplace that shows them how to do all this? So in other words, is there a sheet created for this and some people said where they need to buy it or what? And then add to that, how does your company know if they should purchase the FEMA 4 or the FEMA AIAG VDA?
Great questions. I'm going to answer those in inverse order. If you know what you need to know what you need to purchase, check out your customer's specific requirements. Reach out to your customer directly if you're not sure that SQE is going to answer that for you. They're going to have the most recent, they should have the most recent information on their organization's transition. So for some of you, if automotive is a very minor part of your business, or you're down the tiering chain, they may not worry about you transitioning right away. But just again, what we're being told is it is coming. That was the intention, is that we are going to harmonize. Board of directors at AIAG, which again is made up of industry executives, has come and said, well, they want one FMEA methodology. So we're not going to have 2 feet in both worlds for a significantly longer time. The other is the purchase of an Excel file. AIAG got out of the Excel file business about 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. These forms are all available now in our CTS software. Take that for what it is, but we realized that when you start looking at family foundational FMEAs, Excel files aren't the best way to do that because they become very manual, very laborious to do that. When you look at this knowledge sharing and some of the other things that go on, you want to have a system in place that you can put that information there and it's readily available to everybody in your organization. We get complaints all the time, and you see the IATF nonconformances about document control and things like that. And I will tell you, I was guilty of being the quality manager that went on the road, pulled a copy off the share drive, put it at my desktop because I knew I was going to have a bad internet connection in the hotel, updated a control plan, came back, and then pulled the copy off the share drive because that's the discipline to do it. Now I have 2 working copies. That risk goes away when you start getting into that. And I can just tell you, at the complexity of wanting to share information with your team, you want to have something set up. And that's why we got out of spreadsheets, because we think that directionally correct a software is probably going to be the long-term solution for this for most people.
I believe this one we answered, but I'll throw it out there anyways. Maybe we can just do a quick overview of it. If we do FEMA correctly per the AIAG 4th edition, what is the real benefit with this new AIAG VDA edition?
One's going to be the failure chain. Again, logically, when you look at how the form works, well, first off, the 7-step process is getting you out of that left to right typewriter mode of I'm going through. You're going to look at structure. You're going to look at function. You're going to analyze this step by step along the way. What's my structure? What's my function? What can go wrong? What's my risk? What am I doing to prevent this? What am I doing to detect this? So logically, you're getting yourself into more of a logical progression of how you would naturally do something like this for one. The concept of a failure chain is prevalent throughout the document where you're looking at failure mode, cause, and effect. When you look at the form on 4th edition, it's actually out of order. And I know this is something, Jeremy, I'll hand off to you because you have a pretty good statement on this that I've heard you say before. But again, you're improving the logic by switching over. And Jeremy, if you want to hit that 4th edition form, go for it.
Yeah, real quick. And, I'll say that after working with companies for 2 years now in helping them implement this, and I'm just going to bring up my desktop. We're going to have this conversation real fast because I don't have a 4th edition prevalent and it looks like it's going to boot.
I think he froze up a little there.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. It'll give me a second shot at it.
All right.
While Jeremy's pulling up his thing, no, you do not have to have CTS software or any software program to transition to this. If you're looking to simplify and you're looking to have better control and better accuracy, save yourself a lot of time and reduce your risk even further, then yes, you want some type of software program, whether it's CTS or something else. That's for your organization to determine. CTS is it's a good software, but that's up to you. Okay, Jeremy, I'm sorry.
All right, no problem. Zoom decided I was done, so they always bring me back. It just takes a second. What Brian was talking about, after 2 years of doing this, I will tell you the quality of event is much higher in hitting targets. And one of the most exciting things for me is something called the failure chain. So we'll just call it the FC because you guys don't want to try to watch me do this by hand, spelling failure chain. In the 4th edition, we had the failure mode, which makes sense, leading to the failure effect. Cause and effect, pretty simple, right? Failure mode occurs. The effect is what is experienced, what is felt. But the failure chain was completely out of bed by putting the failure cause over here. Because the way this should work, the failure effect is the direct result of the failure mode occurring, which is brought on by the failure cause. The FE is felt by the FM, which is generated by the FC. And these should be able to be backward and forward. So if I give you an effect, you should tell me what mode created it, and you should be able to tell me what caused it. Or if I give you a cause, you should tell me what mode it will result in and what will be experienced. In the 4th edition, I cannot tell you how many FMEAs got twisted and wrapped around the axle because you had failure mode, failure effect, and in order to make the failure chain work, you either had to move this over here or move that over here, and now you're just Excel jockeying. So something as simple as that now is the effect is the result of the mode, which is caused by the cause. It's very simple, and now it's very intuitive. The intuitive evolution of the form to the way the human creature thinks leads to better quality of event and also lower development costs. And I can say that after 2 years, because the time it takes me to develop an FMEA in this new method is substantially lower than it was in the grinded out method, 4th edition.
And to that point, some of the feedback we received when we started piloting this in 2017 with some focus groups was the seasoned FMEA veterans would come in and say, we understand the logic. It's going to be a change. We're going to have to change our mindset how we do it, but we get it. But the people that had not done FMEA before said, oh, this makes total sense. I mean, you're looking at a logical progression starting at one point and going to another, and everything flows now. There's not any sort of movement around and, okay, now where was I again type of thing. So it lays out nicely.
Okay, and what is COQ? Guys, that's ladies and gentlemen. I say guys, I'm Midwest. That's my type of thinking. But ladies and gentlemen, COQ is cost of quality. And I am now posting in the chat one more time because I love, and you guys have blown up my email. We have a cost of quality tool that'll actually help you analyze your cost of quality. If you email me at the email I put in there, I'd be happy to provide you the link and a video that actually kind of lays out how to use it and gives you a little bit of guidance on that. So if you email me, I'll get you over the cost of quality tool information. But that's what COQ is. Well, for those of you asking, that was a frequent flyer there. Yeah, what do we have next? Well, the mandate. We all know when the mandate is. Look at your customer requirements. How does feature wow, say that word 5 times fast. Feature criticality assessment align with FEMA process?
Feature criticality feature criticality methodology. That's a new one on me, Brian.
Yeah, that's new to me too. I can just, from a logical perspective, you're going to look at some of that and say, okay, what do I, what's important, what isn't? But
yeah,
when we look at the FMEA methodology, again, we're supposed to be looking at all of these items right now and diving into that and analyzing it.
Quite frankly,
again, it's like, yeah, you're going to look at it, and again, we look at some of, we're risk-based thinkers. We're going to also spend a lot of focus on things that are critical and important. So we just need to make sure we're not losing sight of everything that feeds into that, though, too.
Yep.
And one of the questions, do you need to have senior management engagement for this? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, they may not be sitting in the room, but you definitely need their support to do it, because if you're doing FMEA correctly, you are tying up resources. You're investing resources in this because you're giving everyone a seat at the table to make sure that you're robustly looking at everything and developing a robust design or a process. It doesn't do any good. I mean, again, it took me 3 years at a company before I got to see a DFMEA, and I've been writing PFMEAs without that. It's not how you're supposed to do that. You need to have that investment, that management commitment to say, yes, we are doing that, and that support to make sure that resources are provided, whether it be the feeding document or just the people at the table that say, yeah, we understand what you're doing daily is important, but the development of this FMEA that's going to be a living document is going to be important as well.
Okay, and folks, we're running 15 minutes beyond what we had planned. So any other questions that we did not get to, they will be downloaded. We will send you some type of response to those. You've got my email twice, and I do see from the email activity that no one's hesitating to use it. So feel free to send over your questions. Make it easy on you. We will be sending out on-demand viewing capabilities to this upon the completion of the webinar. Now, it won't happen like boom, it's here. Give it, maybe later this afternoon or sometime tomorrow we'll get it to you, but you will get viewing capabilities of this. And somebody said, well, I want slides. We never release any of the slides, guys. This is all proprietary or copyrighted information. We won't release the slides, but we will release on-demand viewing capabilities. So feel free to get in touch with me, Cost of Quality Tool. I appreciate all the positive comments. And I want to personally thank Jeremy and Brian. I learned something. And everybody else seems to be very positive. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you all for tuning in. It was a pleasure to speak with all of you.